On my radar today, President Obama ran on a platform of change, promising the most open and transparent government in history. Well, now we're going to see that promise in the form of pictures. The Pentagon has announced today it will, in fact, lift the video and photo ban for media coverage of U.S. war dead returning from the front lines. Pentagon officials say they will leave the decision, however, of media coverage up to the families of the fallen in the end. Jon Soltz is the chairman and co-founder of VoteVets.org. The group has been on the very front lines of this fight and started a grassroots campaign with its members to lobby the Pentagon. Jon, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for covering.
This is a huge story that's just come out today. As you know, the Pentagon saying we're going to lift this ban, but at the same time, they're going to leave it up to the families to decide whether they want pictures taken. Is that good enough for you?
It is good enough for us. I mean, basically, everyone's personal family, their decision is different. But I think there's two major things that the president did today and Secretary Gates did. I think the first is members of our military, when we raise our right hand, it's not to the Democrats or Republicans, it's to the Constitution of the United States. And it's not constitutional to handle the media the way they've handled them. And I think the second and the most important is that this truly honors the sacrifice of the men and women who fight for our country. That this is it's a very humbling ceremony, but it's truly, something that's respectful, and it's a way that our entire country can honor their sacrifice. And it's sort of been pushed in the closet by the Bush administration. So we're very honored that Secretary Gates took this stance.
And let's be clear, this was a policy that was put in place in 1991, the first Persian Gulf War, by the first President Bush. It was upheld by President Clinton, and of course, obviously continued through this latest Iraq war with President Bush 43. It's changing now. The question is, what effect do you think it may have on public opinion? Clearly, the Iraq war is very unpopular, but what about now that we're increasing the number of troops in Afghanistan?
Well, in regards to Iraq, we think tomorrow President Obama is basically going to end the Iraq war. So the debate and the conversation in regards to the first Gulf War and the concerns the first President Bush had about casualties, that concern in the first part of this Iraq war, I'm not quite sure it's going to have that effect that some people think it will when you see the bodies coming home. In regards to Afghanistan, we'll see. In regards to Iraq and the amount of residual troops that are left, if they take combat, then could it be a problem?
Well, the reason I ask that is because 2/3 of the American people, according to the latest Washington Post ABC poll, support the president's decision to send an additional 17,000 troops to Afghanistan. If you have a lot of pictures of war dead coming home from Afghanistan, does that change public opinion of that war?
I'm not quite sure, it will in that specific case. I mean, I think what it does is it opens up the press to what it's supposed to see. The public has a right to see the cost of their war, okay, in this country, for the good and for the bad of it. And I think that's what it does. And if people in this country feel that the war's not going the right way, then they have that right to challenge it. And I would obviously, and everyone knows my stance, not question that. So I tend to think that, and I'm obviously supporting what President Obama is going to do in Afghanistan, and I tend to think the American public understands the sacrifice our men and women make there. So if that does have that effect on public policy, then that's what it's meant to do in the first place, in the sense that we have a democracy and freedom of the press. So be it. And I think that's what the president is trying to do here.
And if more people perhaps see that, they will understand the cost that our men and women and their families are facing because of these wars. Jon Soltz with Vote Vets, thanks so much. I know you guys are happy today about this decision. Thank you.
It is a ban that was put in place in 1991, but by President George H.W. Bush and upheld by the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations. And now President Obama is lifting the ban against media coverage of returning Americans killed in war. Today, Defense Secretary Robert Gates made the big announcement.
As you know, the president asked me to review this policy. After receiving input from a number of sources, including all the military services and organizations representing military families, I have decided that the decision regarding media coverage of the dignified transfer process at Dover should be made by those most directly affected, on an individual basis by the families of the fallen.
And joining me now is Jon Soltz, chairman with the VoteVets.org. So, Jon, your veterans group launched the campaign to get the Pentagon to overturn this ban. How did it feel hearing Secretary Gates today announce it?
Yeah, we're happy with this decision. I mean, for a long time, we haven't felt that we've properly honored our fallen when they come home. The ceremony at Dover is very humbling, and it's something that we feel respects the men and women who fought for this country. And I think on another level, the men and women who fight for our country. Our job is to protect the Constitution of the United States and to limit press exposure, and the press's ability to cover a war, we believe is something that's not good. So we support Secretary Gates and President Obama on this decision.
Well, John, one of the pieces of the puzzle here is that if one deceased service member returns on the same flight and that family objects to the coverage, the entire ceremony will be off limits to the media. What's your interpretation or response to that part of it?
I mean, I think, you know, that people in our organization and many people around the military would think that that's fair, because, you know, what's constitutional in essence with the press is very different when you get into somebody's family. And that's essentially the policy that's in place right now if someone is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, or for funerals around the country of the fallen. So that's actually a policy that's been in place for funerals that they've just adopted for Dover. So we find that policy in the new policy fair.
Well, certainly, as we know, this new president is turning his attention to Afghanistan and planning on sending more troops there. This new policy, when you have more on the ground, there is unfortunately the risk of men and women losing their lives over there. With this new policy or the lifting of the ban, how do you think it will affect the conversation at kitchen tables, even on the internet and some of these blogs about the war and the realities of it?
Well, I think that's riskier for Iraq. Obviously, there's going to be some troops that are left over inside of Iraq, and I think the large percentage of Americans feel that President Obama is going to, you know, completely end the war within 16, 19 months. There will be residual forces there. I think the larger conversation is if those forces are in combat or they sustain casualties, what will that effect have on the American public? This in itself, I'm not quite sure President Obama or Secretary Gates are concerned about what this looks like at the kitchen table as much as they're concerned with doing what they feel is honest and right for the American public. And I give them a lot of credit for that. I mean, they're basically putting our Constitution and our rights, you know, making that a high priority, which is what we fight for in the military more than anything. So I think that they're trying to open up the Department of Defense and our government to where our people and our citizens can have confidence in it again.
All right, John, thank you very much for reacting to that news just announced.